What's going on? It's Suck and I'm back with a brand new video on SuperDuprTech, and in today's video I'll be showing you the results that I got when running a number of different benchmarking tests on the brand new Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6. I do want to quickly remind you that we are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so if you are new around here, be sure to subscribe, smacking that bell icon to be notified when any of my up and coming videos get uploaded. But without any further ado, let's hit the titles. So the first benchmarking application which I ran on the Z Flip 6 was Geekbench 6, and I started off by running the CPU test, and when running this test I got a single core score of 2,329 with a multi-core score of 7,219. I then ran the OpenCL compute test from Geekbench 6, and when running this specific test I got a score of 11,844. I think the interesting thing to take note here is the S24, the S24 Plus along with the S24 Ultra all scored above 15,000 points in this specific test, whereas the Z Flip 6 scored 11,844. I wanted to then see if this was a particular trend, so I ran the Vulkan compute test, and when running this test on the Z Flip 6 I got a score of 14,920, which once again is lower than even the 15,851 points that we got with the S24, and it's certainly higher than the 16 and 17,000 plus points that we see with the S24 Plus and the S24 Ultra. The next lineup of tests which I ran once again come from Geekbench, however it's designed to test the machine learning capabilities of this smartphone. Now when running the machine learning tests on the CPU I got a score of 1,287, when running the tests on the GPU I got a score of 1,158, and when testing the NPU's performance I got a score of 665. And I think once again the most interesting thing to take note of is when testing using the GPU, despite these phones having the exact same chip inside, the S24 managed to pull a score of 1,754 compared to the 1,158 of the Z Flip 6. I then wanted to start testing the graphics capabilities of this smartphone, and so I ran a number of different tests, and I started off by running GFX Bench OpenCL. Now the good thing about running this particular test is it runs a number of other tests which vary from both higher and lower levels of intensity that I ran on and off screen. Now in the interest of saving some time I have calculated the average across these categories, but as always I will show you each individual result. So the average that I got for the higher intensive tasks was a frame rate of 96.21 frames per second, whereas for the lower level intensive tasks I got an average frame rate of 227.33 frames per second. The next series of tests which I ran on this smartphone come from 3D Mark, and the first of these was the slingshot test. Now when running this test it maxed out every single area that it could, with a maxed out score, a maxed out graphics score and a maxed out physics score. So I then ran the slingshot extreme test, and when running this test it once again maxed all parameters, maxing the score, the graphics score and the physics score. And we got a similar story when running the wildlife test, with it maxing both the score and the frames per second. And where you'll find things start to differ is when it comes to running the wildlife stress test, with the best score the Z Flip 6 scored being 9,942 compared to its lowest of 7,806. And so I once again want to draw a comparison between the Z Flip 6 and the S24 Ultra, with its lowest score being 8,604 once again compared to the Z Flip 6 which scored 7,806. So I then ran the wildlife extreme test, and when running this test I got a score of 3,041 with it scoring an average frame rate of 18.21 frames per second. And these scores were pretty much in line with what I had got with the S24 lineup, and so I wanted to see if there were any differences, and so I ran the wildlife extreme stress test. I on the Z Flip 6, it scored a best score of 2712, with its lowest score being 2010. And once again, if we compare this to the S24 or the S24 Ultra, the best score that the S24 scored was 2939, with its lowest being 2444. So we can clearly see that even though both of these smartphones have the exact same chip within them, that there is clearly some differences in the performance. And the only attributing factor that I can put this down to is the form factor of the Z Flip 6 compared to the more traditional smartphone style of the S24. I then ran the Solar Bay test to test the ray tracing capabilities of the Z Flip 6, and when running the Solar Bay test, it scored 5136, with it scoring an average frame rate of 19.53 frames per second. And once again, comparing to the S24 scored 6206 compared to the 5136 of the Z Flip 6. We can once again see that there are some differences in the performance between these two devices. And boy does the differences come further to light when we run the Solar Bay stress test, with the best score the Z Flip 6 was able to score being 5048, with its lowest being 3098. With the best score the S24 scoring being 6305 compared to its lowest of 5151. We can clearly see that there are some notable performance differences. I also ran the newest test from 3D Mark, being the Steel Nomad Lite, and when running this test it scored 1283, with it scoring an average frame rate of 9.5 frames per second. And when it comes to running the Steel Nomad Lite stress test, the best score the Z Flip 6 scored was 1176, with its lowest being 710. And so even when running this test, we can see that there is a difference of over 30% between the highest and its lowest score. I once again wanted to further test the GPU in this Z Flip 6, so I ran a number of different Basemark GPU tests, and when running the off-screen Vulkan test, it scored 26,879, with it scoring an average frame rate of 268.8 frames per second, which is certainly higher than the 218.59 frames per second that we saw with the S24. And when running the off-screen OpenCL test, it scored 25,183, with it scoring an average frame rate of 251.84 frames per second, which is a lot higher than the 136 frames per second that we saw on the S24, and it's in line with the 264 frames per second that we saw with the S24 Ultra. I then ran the official native Vulkan test, which is run at the native resolution of the Z Flip 6. Now when running this test, I got a score of 20,839, with it scoring an average frame rate of 208.4 frames per second, which is once again higher than the S24 and the S24 Ultra, which scored an average frame rate of 177 and 156 frames per second respectively. And when running the official native OpenCL test, it scored 11,781, with it coming in with an average frame rate of 117.82 frames per second. I also wanted to test the network capabilities of the Z Flip 6. So when running the Wi-Fi speed test, I got download speeds of 511 megabits per second, with Wi-Fi upload speeds of 99.1 megabits per second. And when it comes to testing the cellular capabilities of the Z Flip 6 using the EE network here in the UK, I got cellular download speeds of 36.1 megabits per second, with cellular upload speeds of 18 megabits per second. I then ran the CPDT speed test to test both the storage and the RAM speeds in the Z Flip 6. So when running this test, I got sequential write speeds of 513.55 megabytes per second, with sequential read speeds of 599 megabytes per second. And when testing the RAM, I got random write speeds of 15.74 megabytes per second, and I also got random read speeds of 26.02 megabytes per second. I also got memory copy speeds of 6.46 gigabytes per second. I think the interesting thing to take note of is whether it was the S24, the S24 Plus, or the S24 Ultra, they all scored above 1 GB per second on the sequential read side of things, especially when it comes to the S24 Plus and the S24 Ultra, which actually scored above 2 GB per second. So it's certainly a little disappointing to see that we're getting almost a quarter of the speeds of the S24 Plus, let alone the S24 Ultra. I then ran another disk speed test to see if it was just differences between applications, and yeah, there was no difference, with the Z Flip 6 coming in with read speeds of 688 megabytes per second with write speeds of 142 megabytes per second, and this is in stark contrast to what we've seen with the S24 lineup of smartphones. I then ran the AI benchmark and got scores of 3144, which is in line with what we saw with the S24 Ultra, with it scoring 3186. I then ran a series of different tests from Antutu, and when starting off running the graphics benchmark, I got a scores of 1,102,212. And when it comes to running the Antutu storage test, I got sequential read speeds of 3,447 megabytes per second with sequential write speeds of 3,038.7 megabytes per second. I also got random read speeds of 1,634 megabytes per second with random write speeds of 1,210 megabytes per second. I also ran the Antutu HTML browser benchmark, and when running this test, I got scores of 72,901. So be sure to subscribe, clicking that bell to be notified when my next video gets uploaded to the channel. And if you've got any questions with anything you've seen in today's video, then be sure to go and hit me up on my social media, that's X and Instagram. I'll leave them linked down below in this video's description. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care and have a good one.